Hello everyone and welcome to the Finland Azure User Group Tips and Tricks 2020 Extravaganza. I just got a note to my earpiece that apparently Sakke's voice wasn't audible, but you can find that video from the user group channel if you want to take a look. I'm sure most of you have already seen it multiple times during this year when we have had these tips and tricks sessions. So welcome, my name is Mika Haapsaari. I'm gonna tell you a little bit about ARM template deployment scripts. Today I'm a senior cloud architect at Nordcloud and I am based in the Netherlands in Amsterdam at the moment. And yeah, welcome to the show. As I mentioned, I'm senior cloud architect. I've been working with Azure roughly 5 years as a full-time job. Started working on it roughly 8 years ago in 2012. And yeah, I had to mention that I have created an ARM template before, so I do know what I'm talking about. Trust me. A little bit about Nordcloud before we start. I hope everyone knows the name by now. We are a European cloud leader, public cloud leader, with I think we already have around 500 people working with Azure, AWS, GCP. Yeah, that's all I'm gonna say about this. Yeah, so about the actual topic here, I'm gonna walk you through a little bit about what deployment scripts are. If some of you saw the presentation by Teemu Tapanila, I think a few months ago, he already mentioned a little bit about what it's for, what it is about, but this is kind of meant to give you a little bit deeper detail about the topic. And yeah, and then I'm gonna share you, let's say, the official benefits of using deployment scripts and a little bit added with my own experiences and added value and the benefits that I've already seen in semi-production. And yeah, sharing my own experiences on the what's good, what's not good, and what is still kind of missing. And then I'm gonna show you a small demo, and then I'm gonna answer your questions about the topic as best as I can. So what are deployment scripts? On the to begin with, they are still a preview feature. It's I think it was released around June of this year, so it has been in public preview for a while now, and hopefully they will start rolling it out to GA in the really near future. I'm not sure about the timelines on that, but I'm at least hoping that this year would be the schedule, because this is something that we have been looking forward to. So the deployment scripts are essentially an expansion to ARM templates. So it's not really a replacement or anything, it's just to make them better. Before ARM templates, as you know, they have been declarative. It's you want something to happen and you tell exactly what you want to happen, and the ARM template just does it for you. But it has been lacking the, let's say, logic behind it. So for example, if you want to have conditions, you want to do something based on a value of another resource or whatever have you, it's been, well, not impossible, but at least annoying enough that you have always been searching for other possibilities to do the same thing outside of ARM templates. So the deployment scripts are at least meant to be the solution for these kinds of issues. Yeah, as I mentioned, they are just not always enough. And Personally, I have always hated the nested and linked templates. So this is also huge plus on my book, so that we can finally at least limit the use of those. Maybe not get rid of them altogether, but at least we don't have to do everything, let's say, in another resource that is somehow related to the thing that you're deploying in a nested template or something like that. But we can just do it in a deployment script, which is, in my book, that's the best thing, best thing about this. Also, as the trend seems to be going, the deployment scripts use user-assigned managed identities, which seem to be getting more and more popular in Azure. And I'm really glad that they started to do it right off the bat, that they want to do it with managed identities and specifically user-assigned ones. So it also gives you a lot of opportunities that, for example, you don't really have, for example, if you use your own account, or, well, you have the possibilities, but you maybe don't want to do that, especially in your production releases. So you can always use the identity. Uh, Practically, with deployment scripts, you can do anything you can do with PowerShell, Azure PowerShell, or Azure CLI. So at least I haven't found anything yet that you can't do. I'm assuming that there will be some limitations on modules that you can import to it or install to it, but I haven't found one yet. Let's see if I will eventually bump into one. But especially, I'm expecting that some custom modules from like an unknown source or something, it will kind of deny you from installing or something like that. But at least the ones in PowerShell Gallery seem to work, which is already a good thing. Essentially, the backbone or the backend of the deployment script infrastructure is a storage account and a container instance and a new resource type called the deployment script. I will show you a little bit later, but these three items are the things that you need to run the script, or you don't actually need to do it. Azure will do it for you. So when you add a script to your deployment script, it will create the container instance and the storage account it needs to run. So it's at least semi-automatic in that sense. Here is one example I actually have been using in production already. I know, it's still in preview. I shouldn't do that. Don't judge me on that. But this was really the handiest thing I could come up with at the time, and it works, especially when I don't have to deploy it all the time. I can just deploy it when I need it, so it's enough for this scenario. So don't judge me. As you can see, it's not that complex of a syntax. What you have is you have to define the user-assigned identity, the resource ID for that. You need to specify the kind. In this example, it's Azure CLI. You have to define the version of it, 2.0.80 in this case. Then you have the timeout, retention, and cleanup settings. So basically, if you have a long-running operation and you want to, well, you know how timeout works, so don't need to tell you that. Retention, it basically means if something, well, it's dependent on the next one, so the cleanup preference. So if you have on success, it will clean up all resources from your Azure subscription whenever the whole run was successful. And the retention interval tells you how long it will wait until it cleans it up. So in this case, it's 1 day. So 24 hours, you can still see the input, the output, and the result of the script in your portal, through PowerShell or whatever you want to check it with. And yeah, you can set that between anything between 30 minutes and I think 30 days was the maximum. There are different cleanup preferences, like on success, on failure, only on error, I think was one of them. It's pretty handy cleanup automation, so you don't have to care about those resources hanging around in your resource groups after deployment. And lastly, there's the script URI. I will tell you a little bit about those things later, but in this case, it's just a Azure Quick Start template bash script. Yeah, I will dig into those a little bit later. And this is the exact, well, not the same script, but a similar script in PowerShell that we have. This is basically what this does is it grants an Azure AD group access to a Azure file storage share, which you can do in a deployment script, which is really handy because in ARM templates, I think you still don't really have an option to do that because it's also a fairly new feature, but they have a PowerShell commandlet for it. You can do it in the same template with the deployment script as you deploy the actual storage account, which is really nice. The syntax of the PowerShell deployment script is more or less the same. You defined that it's Azure PowerShell. You define the PowerShell version to 4.6.1 in this case. The differences mostly come with the arguments. All of you who have done Azure DevOps pipelines probably know or will see this as pretty familiar. It's more or less the same way that you pass in arguments to the script, but you can do it here pretty comfortably. I will also tell you a bit about the annoyances with that, because it's not, in the preview stage, it's still not maybe the most comfortable way of doing that, especially with arguments, but I will go to that a bit later. The benefits, the first line especially is from the Microsoft documentation. So far, I wish that all of these were true. Of course, yes, it's still in preview. I'm not going to judge it based on it yet, but especially the debugging could be a little bit more handy. It's handier than it used to be with just ARM templates, for example. The debugging and the logging is already better, and I hope that they will keep on working that, because there's a lot of possibilities that you can actually have meaningful logs that you can actually use to troubleshoot, which is a good kind of direction that they're heading to, but they're still not there yet, I believe. But yes, easy to code, that is the number one thing. So it's everything you already know. It's PowerShell, it's CLI, you don't have to learn anything new. Of course, if you don't know those, you do, but you know what I mean. Yeah, you can develop your scripts in your favorite development environment. That's obvious. Yeah, as I mentioned, user-assigned managed identities, which is always a good thing. But what is maybe the revolutionizing thing is passing, for example, ARM template parameters, variables, or deployment outputs to these deployment scripts. That's and vice versa. If you do a deployment script and you want it to have an output that you want to use in your ARM template, you can do that, which is awesome. In a word, it's really handy. It works like a dream, and yeah, it made our previous project a lot more comfortable. Yeah, other benefits that I came up with, like there are probably a lot more use cases to this and a lot of more benefits in using these, but these are the ones that I kind of came up with. For example, in ARM templates, you didn't really have the option to, for example, create a resource in another resource group and then like dependent resource in another, for example, like log analytics in another workspace and app service in another. But deployment scripts kind of gives you the option to do that. And the same with, for example, querying values. Of course, you could have done that at least in a way before, but it wasn't really comfortable to do that. But now you can just basically, let's say, do an invoke REST method command in PowerShell, and you can query an external API to get a value of whatever you need. And that's all you need to do. And yeah, C is the one that I already mentioned. It actually gives us logic in an ARM template, which is the thing that is the most beneficial to me. A little bit about the experiences and downsides. As I mentioned, we have been using deployment scripts already in semi-production. Well, it is production, but maybe not in a way that we use them all the time or every day or anything like that. It's only in a more limited way, so we thought that using a preview feature is okay in this case. Yeah, as I mentioned, these features are still in preview, so whatever I tell you now, it might not be true in a month or next week or especially after it goes GA, so keep that in mind. The first one, and actually the most annoying one, which we did not yet solve why that happens, is misfiring on the target subscription. So basically what I mean by that is if I run a deployment script in subscription A, for some reason it doesn't know that it's supposed to be running in subscription A, but it tries to do that in subscription B for some reason. It still happens even though the managed identity doesn't have access to that subscription, and we tried everything we could think of, but still it didn't make a difference. It basically just says that, yeah, this managed identity doesn't have access to do this in this subscription, which we never wanted to do in the first place. But what we found out is that if we just do set AZ context or AZ account set and define the subscription, it works. So that's at least a workaround on it. I'm hoping that it's either something that we just didn't think of that why it does that, or that it's a known issue. Probably should actually contact someone from Microsoft to verify that if they aren't aware of that. But yeah, that's the case that we bumped into. Another one that we might not have known if this is actually a feature or a bug, or hopefully it won't stay like this at least, is that inline scripts are single line only. So if you have a PowerShell script, you have to have it in one line to actually get it running. I'm pretty sure that I managed to run one script that wasn't single line, but for some reason I think it was in the middle of the project that might have changed, or I don't know what happened, but it might be just because it's in preview that it just doesn't work at the moment correctly. Then the other one that is also a bit annoying, that all external scripts, so everything you have a URI for running the script, it has to be externally publicly accessible. I'm assuming that that will change in the near future, at least to, I don't know, maybe support storage account access secrets or something, SAS tokens, I mean, or maybe even Azure DevOps repo public access tokens, something like this. But at the moment, they have to be publicly accessible, and it's kind of limits your running of scripts to something that can't have anything that ties to you or your customer or something to that script, which of course maybe you shouldn't do in the first place, but you know what I mean. Something that, yeah, it's a feature, but it's also something that we didn't notice at first. It's actually the same feature, or yeah, let's call it a feature that custom script extensions, for example, have, that you have to force it to rerun if you want to run the same script on the same resource that you have already deployed. So there is a property in the script called force update tag that basically you can just supply a UTC now value or some form of a changing value that forces it to update the deployment. Then it also needs the container instances resource provider on the subscription level, or the identity that you run it with needs to have access to register that resource provider, which might be given, might be like simple enough, but yeah, it won't work if you don't do that. Luckily, there's a pretty clear indication on the logs that, yeah, you don't have this resource provider, so try again. Yeah, and then the second to last one, the deployment name needs to be unique. That's also kind of makes sense because it also needs to start up the container instance with which gets a DNS name and everything, so it needs to be unique. I think that actually the container instance, yeah, that needs to be globally unique, so it creates that name by itself automatically, but also the deployment needs to be unique in your subscription because of the ARM deployment syntax. And then the creme de la creme, or the last one, sometimes it just fails. I'm at least hoping that it's a preview bug that they are working on something and sometimes the backend just isn't on, or they're doing an update or something, and yeah, then your script just will fail. And it doesn't really tell you why it failed. It just basically says couldn't find the resource needed to run this or something. It's not really clear why, but I'm assuming it's because they are working on the back end of the script infrastructure or something like that. But be prepared, especially if you're doing stupid things like me and running this in any project that you're working on. Be prepared that it will not succeed all the time. So maybe don't use it. Use it in any, let's call it, actual dependent scripts yet, or at least make it in a way that you don't care if it fails in your case. I'm seeing that I have used a lot of time already, but let's keep on going. I have a really short demo. It's actually the same script that I showed you in the CLI example. Yes, so I have a key vault that it creates in this script, and I have the deployment script that basically what it does, it's the same script that you saw in Azure Quick Start templates. What it does is it's a bash script that creates a public key and a private key, and it outputs the result of those keys in the deployment script, and then after that I can use those keys and store them inside the key vault that I just created. So I needed this to create just a random private key and a public key and store it somewhere so that whenever I need it, I will have a set of keys that I can use. I will just run this script. Actually, the only thing I really need to show you is that what happens in the background. It doesn't really make a difference in this demo what what the actual script does, but what will happen in Azure when I do. And I hope it's running. It will take a bit of time to pop in here. As you can see, I have the managed identity here, and now it just populated the deployment script resource called generate keys, and soon it should start up the actual deployment. Let's hope it didn't fail. Not yet, at least. Yes, there we go. So it creates a storage account where it actually stores the script that you're running, so that it has a place to actually get it if for some reason it wouldn't have the access to get it after you have downloaded it already. So I'm not really sure why it needs the storage account. I guess that's more secure way of accessing it from the container instance, so that they don't actually need to have the container instance publicly accessible and the storage account itself. Yeah, it then downloads the script to the container instance and it runs it from there. And in this deployment script resource, we can then see what happens. Here we have a log that is not really easily read, but at least there's a log. That's good. And in the output section, it's one line, but yeah, you can still see that there's the private key. Yeah, and this is only the arguments, but then we can go and take a look in the key vault. Unauthorized. That's disappointing. Access policies. Yeah, I don't have access to this. But I'm actually running out of time, so you just have to take my word for it that I do have brand new keys in that key vault after running this script. Yeah, that was my bit of presentation. Now it's time for questions. I see that at least Pasi has some questions. So if you have anything to ask them in the YouTube chat. I will answer as best as I can. Not sure if I can answer everything. Pasi is asking, how do these work with complete mode? Doesn't it kind of make it impossible to deploy with anything other than incremental? That is a good point. Well, yeah, it depends what you actually run in those scripts, I guess. Like if you run something you can repeatedly do, and it doesn't matter if you don't have a dependency on anything you have created in the complete template, then it shouldn't really matter. So it's actually a matter of context on what you are deploying than the actual feature. What happens, still Pasi is asking, what happens if you use an SAS tokenized URI with the script? That should be exactly the same as publicly accessible, right? That is a good point. It does say in the documentation that it should be working, but the time that I tested using an SAS token, there was a problem parsing the URI with the SAS token. I'm guessing it's the question mark or something that it doesn't know how to parse. So there are some problems, but it will be working. sure about that, but at the time that I tested this, it wasn't possible, or at least not in the tokens that it made for me when I tried it. Did you need to manually install some AZ PowerShell modules, etc., or is there some container image you can check if your models are present or not? Basically, everything that you have in the standard installation of Azure PowerShell, when you define the exact version in the script, is already pre-installed. So if you need something outside of the standard modules of Azure PowerShell, you need to define those with the install and import module commands. Yeah, that's pretty much the answer. Are there any other questions? Ansi is asking, how's Amsterdam? It's a beautiful day today. The weather is nice. It's almost in full lockdown at the moment, so not the most comfortable at the moment, but all in all, it's good. Thank you, Ansi. Greetings to Kirkkonummi. All right, if there's no other questions, I thank you. And if you want to ask me something after this session or just want to say hi or connect on LinkedIn, whatever, these are my contact info. And I will see you hopefully when I again travel to Finland again in maybe some conference or what have you. Right, have a nice day, everyone.